Hello everyone, my name is Jared Bibby. I'm a Police Superintendent for the Isle of Man Constabulary, and as part of the CYBERISLE 2020 I want to talk to you today about policing in a digital landscape and what the effects have been on policing over the last 12 months for the Constabulary. I spoke at last year's event and really things haven't changed in many respects in terms of demand on the policing and where we are with the World Wide Web and the use of the internet and the various tools within it. And just really to recap on that, about the internet is not a luxury, it's a necessity, and it's something that we've found ourselves having to police and deal with on a daily basis, which has really changed the way we do some of our business and some of the impacts that it's had on policing and the crime types that we deal with on a daily basis. Mobile use, as you will all be aware, has continued its rapid evolving across the globe, with over 5 million mobile users now, and mobile technology is one of our biggest threats, issues that we have to face within policing and what that means to us. Over 4 billion internet users and over 3 billion active social media users, and the use of social media within policing, for good and for bad, has really been a steep learning curve for us within the Constabulary. So in terms of what's changed for us, one of the biggest impacts has been around trying to keep up with the technology and the advances within technology, and how criminals use that technology to commit various types of offending, and what impacts that has on our resourcing and capabilities to deal with it. So if we take, for example, now just the average mobile phone and its data capacity and what that looked like compared to a number of years ago, and the equivalent of 1 terabyte of storage now on a mobile telephone, devices that we all carry and use, is the equivalent of 60 piles of typed paper stacked as tall as the Eiffel Tower. And this is a slide I've used before, I've spoken about before when I've presented on this subject. It just really emphasises in today's world how much technology is wrapped up in one small device that often is used to commit offences, to commit various types of frauds, money laundering, or store information, or just communicate between criminal networks. So that's been a real challenge for us within policing and how we deal with that in the evidential chain, not least to extract that information from it. So it's really interesting to see the equivalent of what it looked like 10-15 years ago, where you would go and seize a box of paper, versus now it's all contained in digital handsets, mobiles, laptops, etc. So in terms of the Constabulary, what have we seen over the last 12 months in terms of demand and the types of information? So in front of you now is a slide which is based around our demand and what the impacts have been to us, and I'll run through it just for everybody's information, but it's there for you to read. So the general impacts on policing from a resourcing capability and our ability to actually deal and process volume has come in lots of different guises, but evidence gathering, which underpins nearly all of the work that we do, has been really, really key. So I talked a moment ago about mobile phone technology. Being able to extract that data, the information that's now contained on them, is a real challenge for us in the digital forensics world, and that ability to bring the data and put that into the courts for evidential purposes. The volume of it has continued to increase, and I'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation, around the volume that we saw it only 5 years ago to where it is today in terms of the abstraction of that. One that's probably not really known to most people, but one of the things that we deal with within police investigations is then dealing with all the material that doesn't form part of the investigation in terms of evidence, and that's unused material. And digital unused material now forms a huge backbone of a lot of the work that we have to undertake, and that has a real bearing on resource, time spent before you can actually prefer charges or put a case before the courts, because of the mandated obligations under the legislation framework to deal with unused material. And not least, and I'm sure any techies listening in will know, the issues that then come with capability, storage, and training to keep current with all of these issues. What have we seen in terms of threats? We've seen lots of different things, but generally only in small doses. And when I say in small levels, things like DDoS attacks, malware, ransomware, whilst they're always ongoing, we tend not to be the end organisation that sees and deals with that. Most of that is managed by Government Technology Services and OXIA, or Office of Cybersecurity, around what that threat picture looks like. But nevertheless, we do get some that are referred through to the police. It's an ever ongoing threat for us as an organisation to keep our information safe and secure, and we take a lot of measures to ensure through our CYRO that we meet the international obligations around that. We have seen a lot of increases in online crimes and frauds just with the recent COVID-19 pandemic that we've gone through. Those levels of fraud, scammers attacking local consumer sites has been really prevalent for us here. We've seen a lot of email and phishing attacks and identity theft type offences. Organised crime, we'd be naive to think that doesn't affect us, and probably even more so in the world that we live in, where the internet and digital landscape sees no boundaries really in terms of how criminals can now take money from people's accounts, fraud people, defraud people out of different things. And that organised crime really is geared around that, for money laundering, the importation of drugs to the island, dealing in virtual currencies on the dark web to facilitate frauds, and not least COVID-19 exploiting the vulnerable that have resulted within that with the various types of scams. And that's what these organised criminals prey on, is looking at key markets that they can make their crime work for them around that. In terms of cybercrime and the enabled dependent crime, we have seen a steady and increasing sad picture really around the use of indecent imagery, the publication and distribution of those. And we've also seen significant numbers of cyberbullying, sextortion cases through the last year. Again, they're sad cases, and they're cases that would never used to be years ago in our psyche within policing at all, but now it's becoming everyday use of our time to investigate those sorts of offences. Through social media platforms and other routes on the internet, the risk to public around harassment, stalking, and social media and this whole social engineering side is used quite a lot around that to commit those types of things. And as many of us will know within our own homes, in terms of the evolving infrastructure and types of devices that people have now, the whole raft of Internet of Things has really made policing complex. So no longer are the days where if we executed a search warrant to go and look for evidence, we're just looking for paper-based material, we're looking for digital devices. We also might be looking at the individual's fridge, their router, their home Wi-Fi setup. There are so many things now, from cars to heating hubs to hot tubs, you name it, that have a digital element to them that sometimes have to be considered dependent on the type of crime that's being investigated. We've seen a number of risks in terms of threats that have come across, and we've looked at this year, not least just to individuals and individuals victims, but disruption to organisations, to companies, loss of data, the downtime and cost to those companies, and ultimately the economy around that. And last but not least, information security, that encryption, anonymity, the way criminals now work and operate has caused a lot of challenges really for law enforcement to deal with that anonymity, the encryption on devices. And we've come up with, and we work in collaboration with a number of other agencies across the UK and with the Channel Islands to deal with some of those issues that are posed by mobile technology and phones. There are some legislation gaps that we've had, we're still working towards around that, and capability and training, as I touched on at the start of this slide, is an ongoing issue for us in terms of keeping a pace with the change in technology. And just on the cusp, and just to finish off with this slide, then is the whole quality assurance that sits around what we do and how we operate within the digital sphere, and that's ISO accreditation, the body that looks at regulation and the set of conditions really that manages around everything we do, from obtaining information from a computer to how we download CCTV to how we store it to how we then produce that in evidence. So there's a whole lot of demand that's grown and grown, and 2020 has been no exception in terms of what that demand threat has meant to us. The overarching picture from the National Strategic Assessment hasn't changed. Oxford have just put out their survey recently, which will update some of the national statistics. But in terms of the local picture here, 21% have had online account compromised. This is from last year's survey. 91% of people have received fraudulent emails. 98% of our population on last year's survey still shop online. I suspect with the COVID pandemic, the recent survey that's gone out, that number will probably have only increased in terms of people, how they do their business now, and people working more and more from home. So the whole use of the internet, and I expect that we'll see this in our 2020 survey update, will have only increased in terms of those demands and how people use the internet, how people bank on the internet, how people shop on the internet, which in turn potentially makes them more vulnerable to the types of online fraud that we've spoken about. The granular demands that my teams face in dealing with it vary really, but in terms of the types of devices that we examine and come into mainstream within our investigations really break down into phones, computers, laptops, USB devices, and they account for the vast majority of the types of investigations that we undertake and the types of devices we examine. The slightly more obscure ones always come in to test us in terms of, I spoke before about the fridge or the washing machine or the other types of devices, and we've got the capabilities to deal with all these things. It's becoming ever more and more embedded within the types of cases that we deal with. If I speak very briefly now about the number of phones as a good example that we've examined over the last year, and that may give you a flavour in terms of the volume that we deal with here on the island. So in terms of one of our bread and butter lines of investigation is the download and extraction of data from mobile telephones, and in the last 12 months alone we've dealt with over 836 mobile devices specifically to look at evidence that might support a prosecution in given types of investigation. The main driver for them is the importation of drugs to the island, the possession of drugs within this jurisdiction, but also, and worryingly, is the use and sharing of indecent images. So in 2019 we had 109 devices that were examined for drugs related matters, and in the first quarter of this year we've dealt with 110 examinations purely on phones to deal with drugs matters. And in the same breath, dealing with indecent images, in 2019 we dealt with 84 devices, and just again in the first quarter of this year we've dealt with 103 relating to indecent images and sexual offence type investigations. So that's quite a worrying trend for us in terms of coping with that demand, but actually trying to understand what are the precursors to that, what prevention measures can we put across in terms of that messaging, and really appealing to the public around being safe online, really use technology to its advantage and for everyday life, which we all do, but actually take those safety measures around not sharing certain content, closing down to the right levels your security settings on your social media sites, that doesn't allow you then to be vulnerable or for criminals to exploit weaknesses where people don't take those steps. So in terms of how the demands changed from 2017-18 through into 2019, really the top tier of offending online hasn't really altered for us, other than the investigations pertaining to drugs and sexual exploitation has just swapped in terms of its level of priority. Drugs now accounting for slightly higher than sexual exploitation and indecent images, but nevertheless they both account for the vast majority of the type of work we do. There are, however, a considerable number of other inquiries that are ongoing in terms of that use of the digital world. Proceeds of Crime Act, money laundering, again equates for quite a substantial number of the types of investigations that we undertake. And equally then, we've sadly had a number of deaths over the last 12 months, so suicide's been quite prevalent as we've come out of the COVID side, and the use of the digital world within that and investigations, how they support those coronal investigations, has been quite key to some of the work that we do. The other breakdown of categories of offence really then drops down to quite small numbers in terms of the impact to us, but they do relate to offences of robbery, harassment. That generally breaks down to the use of social media platforms and the like. I spoke last year about what was next for us as a constabulary, and we've made big inroads into implementing our cyber crime strategy, which looks at lots of things from our capability, our training, to our resilience, and really trying to deal with some of these granular issues that I've touched on in this short presentation. And we've really had the benefit this last 12 months of being joined up now with the Office of Cybersecurity and Information around bringing together our strategy and their whole prevention strategy, which is really, as we go through into 2021, will be, I hope, will really pay dividend in terms of making the island a safer place in that digital sphere, and really combining our efforts with both sides of the coin, really, of what we've learned in the last couple of years around we're never going to police our way out of the digital issues that we face and what we've got with us. But what we can do and what we can make real inroads into is prevention, and getting that in the psyche and the culture of business people, of everyday users of the internet. And that's what I would like to get out of today's message, really, is that encouragement to individuals, to groups, to businesses, to employees, is those steps that you take as an organisation or as a business or as an individual are really key to the knock-on effect that may impact you as an individual or a business going forward. So the whole prevention agenda, for me, is really key to how we as an island go forward in the digital sphere, and not least to its impacts on policing, because as I said, a minute or so back, for me and the resource I have here, we're never going to deal with the swathe of never-ending reports of online offending that we get. But what we can make real differences to is prevention, and how you treat the internet, for good or for bad, really, really key. So in terms of what you do as an individual, from your password protection, two-factor authentication, or other measures that you can install, I really encourage people to use the tools that are out there from the Isle of Man government, from government technology services and other private entities that operate within the jurisdiction, to really offer that advice, to benchmark yourselves in terms of your security and your information measures that are there, because it really does pay dividends. If you've pressure tested your response, your security, then it goes some way to help, hopefully, then preventing you being a victim of the types of attack that we see. And we've seen some really sad cases over this last year of businesses falling foul of essentially slack measures, where had certain measures been in place and followed rigorously, then the offence would never have occurred. I can't put a figure in terms of what offences would have been prevented or never had occurred had the individual or businesses taking preventative advice, but it's fair to say that there is quite a high percentage of the cases that I see and come across my desk that the team deal with that in some way are preventable, and we can certainly make the jurisdiction a safer, more resilient place by everybody playing their part in understanding that and the role that they play within the community and use of the internet. Thank you.